Thank you, Senator. Senator Cortez-Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let's put this to bed because I think the facts are important. And Secretary Granholm, I do think it is important to talk about the Biden policy because we are talking about supply and demand. So correct me if I am wrong, because in fact, the BLM under the Biden administration has approved more permits to drill last year for oil and gas than it did in the first 3 years of the Trump administration.
Correct.
And oil production on federal public lands is higher now than at any point since at least 2003.
Correct.
And the oil and gas industry has more than 9,100 approved permits to drill that have not yet been put in use, and 14 million acres of leased public lands that have not yet been put into production. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Great. Because I do think my consumers across the country, we need to deal in facts. We really do. The truth matters. It still does, including in this body. So let me jump to something else, Secretary Granholm, that you and I have talked about. And thank you for coming to Nevada. Thank you for talking, really focusing on what we are doing to make these big, bold investments that you have talked about. One of the things you and I have talked about are nuclear waste and consent-based siting. And as you, the President and the administration have repeatedly stated, that Yucca Mountain is not a viable solution for a repository. Instead, there is an urgent need for the U.S. to incorporate the consent-based framework and findings of the 2012 Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future. With this in mind, I am interested to learn more about the $53 million request for the consent-based siting process in the department's fiscal year 2023 budget. So can you please elaborate on this request and explain how you intend for these funds to contribute to the department's consent-based efforts, should it be appropriated by Congress?
Yes. As you know, first of all, the consent-based siting process has begun in that our Office of Nuclear Energy put out a request for information for seeing whether there is some interest on the part of communities across the country who would be willing to have this discussion. That request for information resulted in over 200 comments. Some were in favor, some opposed. Those comments are being evaluated and will be made public, I think, within the next couple of weeks. The next step is to be able to put out a funding opportunity announcement to begin this conversation. And so that funding that you described, I think it may be a little bit less than that, but the funding that is in the budget for that is to be able to begin that conversation and have, understand the needs of communities who might be willing. As you noted, Yucca Mountain is off the table. So the question is, are there communities that may have, the openness to be able to do that? Obviously, we'd have to come back to Congress. There would be some need to compensate communities for their willingness to do this, and obviously compensate them for any infrastructure that would be necessary. But that process has begun, and the second step of it will happen, I believe, in early fall, where we'll issue the funding opportunity announcement to begin that conversation.
Thank you. Yep. I appreciate that. Let me ask you on hydrogen, because you were just with me in Nevada, and thank you so much for taking a tour of the new Air Liquide hydrogen facility in North Las Vegas with me last month. I was pleased to see that the fiscal year 23 budget featured a 24% boost for the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies program within the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. How does the fiscal year 23 budget ensure that clean energy is utilized in applications that represent a clear pathway for systemically reducing carbon emissions?
Yeah, I mean, the wonderful thing about what Congress has done in providing the bipartisan infrastructure law funding, for example, for hydrogen hubs, is that it allows for the stages of research that have been happening in hydrogen, and I'm assuming your question is related to hydrogen, actually get deployed, and we get to see a variety of applications. So, the Air Liquide site that we saw potentially could have been using gas from landfill waste. That's one feed stream that we might be looking at, or natural gas, or renewable energy. And so the research that's been done on hydrogen and being done, it's a cross-cut across the department because there's some fossil-free feedstocks and there's some renewable feedstocks, but it will be informing the hydrogen hub FOA, the funding opportunity announcements, and then the awards. So the research part and the deployment part are tied very closely, and that's why we've got to keep the research part very active.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.